So, hi, Emma. Thank you so much for agreeing to this interview with me. I really appreciate it. I came across your work around a month ago. Somebody sent me your TED Talk, which, by the way, congratulations for getting a TED Talk. Absolutely incredible. And it really struck me as being just something that was just so well explained, and often something that I'm always talking about on my platforms, like some of the misconceptions of the subjects that we talk about. I'd just be really interested to know, how did you land that TED Talk, and how did the process of doing it go?
Yeah, so I think it was just, through connections, through connections, through connections. And I think, like anything in life, if you really want something, having followed you as well, Jeremy, I know that you really are focused on this conversation. If you really want something, don't give up, because being relentless on a subject such as child sex abuse is so important. And so I've continued that journey with, I've got important things to say, you've got important things to say, so many people I know have got so many important things to say. And I just think through connections, through people I know, through the work that I've been doing, I came across TED. In fact, I got turned down for TEDx quite a few times, which is not uncommon. And I think, if anyone's watching, I hope that you don't give up, because there's a real process that they go through. And then out of the blue one day, someone just said to me, EJ, look, we're loving your work. We want you to do this TED Talk. Can you, send us, the mission that you want to share? So it was all about refining. And I think, with this conversation, Jeremy, it's really understanding your place, my place, your place, what lane are you in, what's your voice, what do you want to share, and being absolutely clear, because there are so many people out there doing their best to make this conversation be heard, but the people that are being heard are the people that are very clear about their message, which I know you are. I certainly am. And so from there, things happen, right? Things happen. People start leaning in a lot more, and they want to hear what you've got to say. And I still am learning, right? I mean, I keep learning from people through conversations. And I think the day I stop learning would be the day I'd have to stop doing what I'm doing. So yeah, just keep leaning in, connecting, being clear about your messages, and be relentless. If you really want change, then you've got to be relentless.
Yeah, that's amazing. And do you think that the times that they didn't accept your proposal for TED, do you think it's because there some people who are possibly reading your proposal, they're just not ready for this subject? Or do you think also it's because you have improved in your skill level through delivering these tough topics, or is it just a mixture of both? Do you feel like people just aren't ready to talk about this in certain ways?
I think everything that you've just said there is absolutely spot on. It's people not being able to be comfortable with this conversation. I speak very openly about my life, and some people switch off, and that's fine. But I hope they switch back on at some point, because actually those are the people that really need to hear this. I circle around, as I'm sure you do, lots of survivors every day, and that's great, because that you're offering support, but we need to get a chink in the armor there. We need allies to come in, and we need people like TED to step up. We need people to the media to step in, because ultimately that is when the change is going to happen. So absolutely, yes, what you said. I think also it's so complex, right? I mean, I think and I'm sure you're the same, I've had to really understand and finite my message and be clearer as I've gone on, because I think when you start out speaking, it all comes, it's like you're vomiting out there, like everything's coming out and you're like, but actually, I am so clear now about where I want to go and what I want to do, that I want people to hear TED. It's a good thing to hear people like me and you speaking, because we're clear about the messages we share, as are other people. So the more people that can lean in from a media point of view, the message gets shared, the bigger the chances are that we can reduce child sex abuse. You know, I heard you speak, or I saw something that you wrote recently, which I thought was absolutely spot on. You know, the change that is needed, is it ever going to happen I worry that it won't happen in our lifetime. I think anything that I do, you do, and all the millions of other people is a small change, right? If it can be a small change, that's a big change, right? Because then that passes on to the next generation. But the problem is bigger. The social media, the advance in technology, the advance of children, their minds, everything about children is far more advanced now. And so the complications that we had were difficult and horrible as children, but that you factor in what they're up against now and the archaic education we are giving to young people. This is a big problem. So going back to your question, I think it is TED. I think it is, my message is clearer, but I also think people are scared to share this conversation. But ultimately, the ones that are leaning in are the ones that are becoming part of the change, and, you know, how proud they should be of that.
Yeah, it's so fantastic. I'm always trying my best to communicate these topics, like I thought you did so well on your TED Talk, in a way that is digestible for people who feel worried about watching anything on this topic or reporting anything on this topic. I'm sure, well, I know for sure that there are some things that I want to say or I want to write down that I want to, but I know that it's possibly not, people aren't ready for that kind of conversation just yet. So sometimes I do tailor my posts for the audience, because one of my aims is to get this subject in front of on people's tables that don't normally come across it. I want to try to get it outside of the survivor communities as well, you know, like I want my work to land on people's desk that don't normally engage with this or don't know anybody who has ever been through something like this. I want the media companies to report on us. And I feel like, unfortunately, maybe we do need to tailor our message. Do you think we need to tailor our message, or we just need to, I don't know, how do you feel about that? Me saying like we need to tailor our message.
It's interesting, because I think you maybe put a pause on things I don't. I think if I've got something to say and I feel passionate about it, I'm just going to say it.
Okay.
Because I am mindful that there are people in my audience that it could trigger, and I do put out warnings, but I also very clear that I don't advise anyone to stand on a platform like I am now to talk unless you've gone through therapy and support, because, you know, I've gone through, 30 years of therapy to be who I am today. I don't know about you, but I'm very, I've gone through, I have a very big support system around me now, professionally in this environment. And that's absolutely vital to the messages we share. So, when I do any kind of writing about these hard-hitting subjects and, what you're talking about, getting it all out there, I don't just write it in one evening. I will write it and it will be adjusted over about 2 weeks before it goes out. And the message will always be directly to an audience that might not really understand the reality of child sex abuse. Those who've gone through child sex abuse, survivors and families of loved ones, it's also directed at them, but it's more about getting people who aren't really leaned into this conversation like we are to really start hearing things. And I have noticed that more and more people do. I think the high percentage of the people that listen and talk are the ones that are survivors, or they've had child sex abuse has affected their life. But I'm starting to get people who are non-survivors leaning in, and that's a tiny percentage. But again, like the few children, we might say, the few adults that we might get leaning in, they're tiny changes, but they're big changes in the grand scheme of this conversation.
Yeah. And then I'd love to make a point of what you mentioned about the education system being archaic, and I think that's a great word to use. I often say that it's like back in this, I feel like the education system with these topics and delivering what children of today need is back in the Stone Ages and needs massive changes. So maybe our audience are not only survivors, but parents and head teachers and people who write curriculums. Could you say a little bit about your comment on the education system being archaic? I really like that.
Yeah, okay. And PHSE is just a tick box. So, you know, no one likes me in the education system because I say that often, but it is just a tick box, and it needs to not be a tick box. This is a huge problem. I go into schools, I do a lot of safeguarding with teams, education system, and it's great, right? Because it facilitates and supports the PHSE that they do. And I don't mean to take away from the education system, because I think everyone means well, but I do worry that we're more focused on grades than the reality of the life that is happening today. Yes, it is important for children to be educated, but let's wake up and smell the coffee here. We've got social media, we've got technology. When I was, I don't know, but I'm 49, Jeremy, I don't know how old you are, but when I was at school, we learnt computer studies. That was our education. I then went on and I'm fairly comfortable using technology on the computer. I've learned technology on the iPhone. Kids have got way more technology around them than computers, and no one's teaching them how to use this. I mean, you could really rattle me here. I have a big beef about PHSE, the fact that they're not teaching kids. You know, you only have to look at the news recently where a child was knifed and killed because she was asking someone who was filming her for Snapchat to stop filming her, and he got annoyed and he killed her. Wow. I mean, what the hell? I'm sorry, this is just not acceptable. Children do not need technology like they do. And I need to do some research, and I don't know if you know the answer, but apparently in some countries there is a curfew on technology and it will automatically switch off for young people.
Oh, wow.
I don't know if I don't know where that is, but I was talking to someone this morning who said they'd heard of that. So I need to do some investigating, but that would be great. Switch off any activity beyond, I don't know, 5, 6 o'clock in the evening. Kids need to be kids. I mean, it's yes, technology is important because that's their future. But ultimately you're giving kids this phone and it has access to a great big world that I know adults my age struggle with, and we're expecting young kids, some children are as young as 9 on this technology, and I see that a lot through my work, through some of the work I've worked, you know, in the radio and media that I've worked in. The problems around the technology side of education for children is huge, and yet, you know, we're still banging on about with archaic education systems. So yeah, so look, we just need to change that, right? You know, and if you, I, and all the other people can just do some simple changes, it can all add up to a bigger and more safer life and a healthier future for the young people today and the generations to follow. And that is really key.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. I just feel like so much change in that area. I feel like so much change in that area needs to happen for today's children and what they're dealing with. I mean, we're talking about all children of all ages being on some technological device, scrolling through some kind of automatic feed. I mean, you just take YouTube. I mean, all children are watching YouTube on a tablet of some sort. Many, I should say, and they're scrolling. What I don't think is highlighted enough is they're scrolling through a news feed which an algorithm controls, and nobody knows what's popping up on there. It's the videos that they're most likely to click on, but we can't monitor that because we don't watch the child on social media when they're on, not social media, online all the time. So I mean,
it's a real problem. And there's another phone, and it's called the Light phone, and it looks like an iPhone, but you can't do social media on it. Now, you know, there's so many things, and you know, I come up against good, bad, and indifferent conversations around this, and I don't care actually, because I feel very passionate about this conversation and for children and the next generations. I've seen with my own eyes conversations that have gone on in teenager WhatsApp groups. I mean, one child, 12 years old, was asking a group of 100 odd kids in a group when they were going to lose their virginity.
Yeah.
I mean, like, what? I mean, this they should be not having this conversation. And what parents are monitoring that? Now, you know, everyone says you've got to blame the parents, but it's not being educated. And I think, you know, what I don't want to do is offend parents, but actually, you know, these guys are under 16. Let's keep an eye on them. Let's just keep an eye on what's going on with it. If you want them to have social media, then make sure that you're aware of what's going on their platforms, because I've seen, sadly, suicide pacts online. I've seen pressure to lose your virginity by the time you're 12, exploring nude pictures, and obviously just recently we've seen a couple of children killed. And actually, I made myself watch a video, and it was a young girl who was killed, and the video was of people beating her. And then she sadly died, but she had been reporting it, and then they videoed it and she died. And just like, it's mind-blowing that we just aren't helping these children more. And, you know, schools could do much more. But you know what, Jeremy, our conversations, education systems, and parents and everybody doing our best to have these conversations is really important. But until it changes at the top, and by the top I mean politically, we are going to be just banging around in these conversations for a long time. So I've taken a bit of a political lead lately.
Yeah, and this is great, because this is what I wanted to get into. I wanted to know about your movements here.
Yeah, and so I am taking the step forward to get a petition up, and it is not getting anything like close to what it should be signature wise, to help understand the later in life aspect. You know, obviously I work in this space supporting young people through the education and everything, but also it's understanding once you've been abused as a child, as you know, it's not just a 12-week therapy. This is for the rest of your life, and you've got to try and understand how you can undo it to make a success of your life. A lot of people don't have the opportunity to speak out like we are, because they just don't have the support. They're very fearful, very ashamed and embarrassed by what's happening to them. And so then they go into their adult life and they're stuck. And they're not flourishing, right? You're not flourishing. And we need to better understand this conversation. The government needs to support survivors beyond being children and into other adult life with support schemes that can help them in the workplace as well.
Yeah, brilliant.
So I'm doing what I can, and I'm speaking with MPs in the House of Commons at the moment on these subjects, and I've got some, you know, potentially good things happening around that space. But like anything, it's slow, and it could be the rest of my life trying to even get, you know, where I need to be. But you know what, that's not going to stop me, because my legacy will always be now to do what I feel is the right thing for children and survivors of child sex abuse. They will always be my priority. That, you know, for the last few years I've been sort of banging on about the fact that, you know, when a crime happens, the focus remains on the perpetrator. Why? I don't, because it sells papers, it's news, but it's not. You know, get rid of that story, put the focus back on the survivor. So, you know, the articles that I write now in various magazines and in national newspapers are very much about that. Not all of the nationals want to take them on because it's probably not a good seller of, you know, it doesn't make enough money. But, you know, let's stop exploiting this conversation and children. So look, I mean, I know I will keep banging on and keep going on, because I know how important it is on this conversation. But, you know, when we go back to education, PHSE is a tick box, and it needs not to be. And we need more of yous and me's to go into schools to just facilitate this conversation.
Yeah, fantastic. And have you ever spoken in front of young people before? And how did you address that? And how did you go about that? What ages were they? And what was their response?
So I think predominantly at the moment I'm focusing on safeguarding teens. And anytime I speak to young people, the last thing you want to do is scare children. And I've been working with children for over 25 years because I'm a founder of the Performing Arts School for children 4 to 16 years old. So, you know, We work with children, my team work with children, we have very, very strict safeguarding around children, and it's about allowing children to be nourished and flourishing in life. So, you know, safety is obviously of the utmost importance with the work, anything that I do. So any work that you do with children, and any safeguarding that you do has to be around positive reinforcement of healthy relationships, what's appropriate, what isn't, what's trust, what isn't, understanding the body, the physical body. A penis is a penis, a vagina is a vagina. Stop putting fluffy words around this stuff. That's just crap, right? Stop doing that. And in fact, recently someone was discussing with me that when they disclosed that as a young child they were talking about someone touching their flower. And of course, no one really understood what that meant. But of course, if someone had leaned in and understood that sooner, or that child had known it was my vagina, then this could have all been stopped. So we've got to be clear with positive reinforcement, encouraging children through conversation. I'm a professional dancer by trade, so performing is very much my world, with some of my businesses. And allowing children to grow, develop through self-belief, determination, and confidence, and like I say, understanding healthy relationships. So yes, so any work I do with children. In fact, I've just been asked. I've just been given a project to work with a boys' school. So I'm sort of exploring that at the moment. But it's a healthy relationship. So. I did some work a few years ago about using your voice, standing up, speaking out, but again, positively. Interestingly, I was doing a school tour, and one of the schools had me signed up, and then at thelastminute.com cancelled me because they have a lot of vulnerable children in their school, and they didn't have enough support around it. So she said, look, this was the head teacher. She said, look, you're going to come in and tell these kids to use their voice, and I've got no support system for them. I said, what? Wow. So you're going to let them go? This is primary school, right? I said, you're going to let them go through primary school knowing that they've got difficulties that they can't speak up and get support for? She says, I have no choice. Well, that broke my heart because, you know, I couldn't do anything then, but get more determined. Mm-hmm. And that's what's happened, I think, with the work.
Yeah, okay. And just bringing the conversation back to the Parliament and trying to your work within that. What's your aim? What's your aim with all of that?
I want to see...
And the petition, please, as well.
So the petition, if everybody could sign it.
Yes.
Jeremy, come with me to the Parliament. You know, let's just take a load of people. It's just about getting this conversation in. I want survivors to be recognised for who they are and what they've gone through in life. This isn't about a band-aid, right? You don't put a band-aid on or a plaster and 6 weeks later that all comes off. This is a forever difficulty. So we need a Parliament and politicians to understand the reality of this situation. We've recently seen politicians supporting child sex abusers through the court systems, something I'm very vocal about. Blunt has been supporting Khan, who's just been convicted of child sex offences. That is just, just beyond wrong. I don't want to swear, I don't swear, but you know, that is beyond wrong. So we need to change that. We need to get more knowledge and awareness into politicians' understanding of child sex abuse, so from the survivor point of view, and also start looking at the education, PHSC, and what we can do as a society to encourage better education, better forums, better processes for young people to develop. And in the 21st century, not 20th century education, 21st century. Look, I am a tiny voice. I use it as loud as I can, whenever I can, to get heard. And if it can make a change, great. But it's about the bigger picture and all the voices coming together and getting this heard. I want to get that change. If it means going into Parliament and having it, no problem. I have no problem doing that. But we need to just have some change around this.
Yeah, so it's about getting the people who call the shots, essentially, to understand the seriousness of this of this these situations we're talking about. I completely agree with you. I think the perception is, I mean, how many times have people said to me, you should just forget about it and move on? You know, how many times I've heard, even people that are following me now, that have followed me for a long time, if I'm not feeling so good on a day, or I'm feeling very frustrated with something, or I'm having flashbacks, and I write a little post about it just to let people know the journey. Some people are like, oh, you just need to let him go, and I'm like, oh, you're missing the whole point. You're missing the whole point. This isn't something you can just, you know, just wake up one morning and move on and forget about it, because it's constantly knocking on your door. That's one of my experiences anyway. So I feel like what you're saying, one of the things you're saying is we need to get these politicians, the people who call the shots, to really understand what's going on. Now, let me try something here. I've always thought about this, and I know that this would never happen, but I've always thought about this. I feel like people don't understand the seriousness of this because they've never seen it, like actually seen it, you know, because and they've never heard anybody actually talk about it. And when I say talk about it, I mean actually describe what happened between them and their abuser. If we were to let's say we were one day allowed, which I know would never happen, to pick one of the millions of videos that are available on the dark web and actually show it to people. A 5-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 15-year-old being sexually abused by an adult, would that shock the world into action?
Well, again, you know, I shared this in on my TED talk. You know, I have these conversations day in, day out. And recently I'd heard about a 2-year-old who had had every bone in her body broken by her abuser, who was having sex with a 2-year-old baby. This baby will be going through all sorts of mental and physical trauma for the rest of their life now because of that. Now, when I talk about that, people say, oh God, EJ, stop. Yes. I don't want to hear. But I'm like, you have to hear. And they're like, well, how is this going to change? You know, me hearing, how is this going to change anything? I said, because you are going to start understanding what the difficulties are of this conversation and, you know, the reality of it. And now 2-year-olds, you've got no hope, right? Babies, 2-year-olds. In fact, I just wrote an article on this in Man Dad Media about Gareth Davis. He's from Runcorn. He pleaded guilty to the rape of under 13-year-olds, but they were babies. And he had pictures of him lying with babies after he'd raped them. I mean, no one in their right mind could believe someone would do something like that, and they won't want to read it.
Yes.
But the more you can read, I read it, you read it, I read it all the time out of respect for the person. Sometimes it takes me a bit longer to read some things, and that's just because I need to make sure that I'm balanced mentally, emotionally and physically. But I read it because I want to give thought to that person as well, and the difficulties that they will now go through, and then what I can learn from it to help improve my voice on this conversation. But we really need to. I have conversations, like you said, you know, people, non-survivors who I know and love, tell me the same, right? You know, get over it. This isn't about getting over it. It's the psychological impact it's had. I was 9 through to 16 through my abusive years. Now, through those years, I was very confused because I felt like I had feelings for my abuser, right? Because they had groomed me. Now, that's very complex and that's very normal. Anyone on the outside would be like, how could you have emotions for someone who would do something so disgusting and vile to you? Well, actually, that's when you need to start understanding. Yes. When you're a vulnerable child being groomed by an adult, and maybe you're going through difficulties. My father told me at 12 he never wanted to see me again, and I never saw him again. So I was vulnerable. And so when this guy came along and started grooming me, he was known to my family and he was my friend.
Yeah.
So I liked him, and I was so vulnerable that I fell into that trap of being groomed. That's me, times that by 1 billion children around the world that's happening to. So let's understand that, you know, if you've got a vulnerable child, you know, I'd gone from nice child to monster in a few years. You know, most people thought I'd be dead or in prison by the time I was 20. that wasn't normal. So lean into that conversation. What can you do as an adult, a loved one, a friend, a teacher, you know, a safeguarding lead, to support that young child and recognize that it might not be child sex abuse. It could be something, some other abuse or violence or bullying or whatever. But really lean in and recognize that. But the only way we can do that, Jeremy, is by reading the articles and seeing what happens and listening to people about this subject. Sadly, and I'm sure this must be for you as well, I get people who talk to me after it's happened and they're like, EJ, we wish we'd spoken to you sooner. We've been watching your post. In fact, very, very sadly, someone I know very well, her daughter, 13-year-old daughter, this has just happened to, and she's like, you know, wants me to speak with them and work with them, and that's fine. But, you know, someone who lives near me recently said, I wish I'd leaned into this conversation sooner, because her family have just been they've just found out they've been abused by the father. So you know, it's happening under our noses. And as a young child, I remember there's this sensationalized story when it came out that someone that we knew as a young family was abusing the children he was working with, and that was like, God, all we were talking about was him because we knew him and he was the abuser. But what about those kids? So let's just listen more. Let's listen. Let's make this a conversation that we can take forward, and don't think it won't happen to you, because I can guarantee you someone somewhere will be being abused right now, and potentially it could be someone you know.
Yeah.
In fact, while we've been talking, Jeremy, for 30 minutes, how many kids are being abused?
Yes. Yeah, I completely agree. I feel like that grooming conversation is one that just needs to be talked about a lot more, where the young person has feelings for their abuser is something that people can't get their head around, because I feel like the media in particular portray this type of interaction as a big, scary adult hurting the young child, which is not always the case. Sometimes it's gentle, sometimes it's perceived as loving, and that's something that I just don't think we are talking about at all. But we understand we need to get people reading these things. We need people engaging with these things more. My question I'm always asking myself is how are we going to do that? Because to get somebody to read an article is very difficult. I'm always playing around with ideas, and I do try my hardest with this on my YouTube channel, trying to play around with film and drama and things where people will engage in a story about somebody that may be going through something, where it's not, and through the story they learn, as opposed to reading an article or something and just trying to get everybody's eyes on this topic. I always think to myself, if there was ever a program on Netflix that was done really well, that told the story of how a life of a survivor unfolds and people could actually get into the character and understand, I feel like something like that would be a great thing.
Yeah, but unfortunately, you know, will that sell enough? Will that make enough money? And I think it always comes down to, I always call it MPG, money, power, greed. And that you know, there's a driving force behind everything in life that comes down, you know, when you're talking from a media point of view, that's where their focus will be: money, money, money. Yeah. So yes, ultimately I think that would be a great thing. But I also think, you know, just go back to your work, Jeremy. I watch your videos. I think what you're doing is so impressive, and the creativeness of your work is really important, and it's different, right? You know, not everybody's out there doing the short movies and the things. I watched something that you did, it was like a cartoon thing, and I thought, brilliant. Fantastic. How creative is that? Because that appeals to young people as well. And I think, you know, like we said at the beginning, it's understanding the work and lane that you're in. And I think where you are with what you're doing with awareness, you might not be getting, you know, what you want from it, but be guaranteed that even though people might not be responding to you, they'll be getting things from you. Yeah. And ultimately that will be all I can ever ask for. You know, people who I don't even know contact me sometimes and say, oh, I started following you 3 years ago and I'm now ready to talk to you, and because you've given me hope. And that is all I could ask for.
It's an incredible thing.
So I think, you know, getting the messages out, you know, I'm doing the route that I'm doing, you're doing the route you're doing, and I know lots of other people doing the routes that they're doing. All of that combination together is what ultimately continues to be the change. And I think, you know, that we can only sit and circle around that and hope that, you know, it one day makes the difference. You know, I do this. If I got paid for what I did, I'd be a trillionaire by now. But you know, I don't do it for that. I do it for change and to get this conversation heard. Obviously, I do need to work, and I have my own business and the work that I do. But vital for me is that I do as much as I can on this conversation when I can to keep this conversation going.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting what you said at the start of this conversation about the fact that we may never see the change. It's quite likely we'll never see the change that we want in our lifetime. However, I'm a strong believer that if we can really work as hard as me and you are working, we can at least influence the younger generations. I mean, it's so fantastic when you receive a message like that from somebody saying, look, I've been a silent follower for a couple of years, and I love your work, and you've encouraged me to XYZ, speak to my young, like I get messages from parents saying that, which is one of my target audiences, really, saying that, you know, I've been following you for around a year now, and I'm now ready to speak with my young children about these difficult subjects. I feel like everybody, if we can encourage or let people know that everybody has a role to play in this, we shouldn't just leave it to the education system. We shouldn't just leave it only to parents. A few people have commented on a few of my recent posts saying, where I asked if certain subjects should be talked about in schools, a few people commented saying this is the parents' role. But then what about the children that don't have parents that want to carry out that role? I feel like everybody's got their part to play, including the politicians. This work that you're trying to do in Parliament is really interesting to me. I find it very encouraging.
Thank you. Yeah, and you know what? The parent conversation is always going to be a tricky one, because if you've got children thinking it's okay to behave in the way that they are with, you know, when are we going to lose our virginity, and let's go and kill someone, and, you know, or just like those kind of, I'm not saying that that's what they're saying, but certainly there are children being killed unnecessarily, completely unnecessarily. Yes. And, you know, we're not saying it's the parents' fault, but if the parents could identify maybe some difficulties sooner in their child, and maybe that's too hard to even identify, but if they can, this lives could be saved in all sorts of ways, shapes and forms. And for that, I think, you know, the parents definitely have a responsibility, but so does like I say, from the top. We need to go from the top. Yes. Because, you know, we're right down here, right? But then we've got the education system, then you've got, you know, all sorts of tiers before you get to the top. I'm working my way through to do what I can. You're working with your way through with the work that you're doing with parents and education, and that is vital work. And yes. I see so many people stop doing this work. And it really, I find it so heartbreaking, but I also understand, right? Because there are days where you just feel like you're hitting your head against a brick wall, but I won't give up. You know, sometimes I'll be like, right, I'm just gonna have a break for a few days and just focus in on other stuff. And then you come back with new innovative ideas to get the conversation going again. So yeah. It's so many people's responsibilities, from parents to education to politicians, and we are facilitating that conversation. That's how I see it. We are facilitating these important conversations because we have knowledge as adults of what we went through as children.
Yeah, I think one of the things I find very motivating is to take what happened and use it for some good. And I feel like what happened, the experience that I have, if I can, I feel like that in some way gave me enough strength to deal with it and squeeze the lessons out of it and communicate them in some way. Something also, Emma, that I really wanted to speak with you about was the perpetrators, the people that are doing these things, the offenders, because I am a strong believer that they also, we need to work out what we're going to do with them, whether the people, of course, the people that have offended, the people who have offended and served their prison sentence, and now they're back out into the community, and the people that have these thoughts but have never offended, therefore in the eyes of the justice system they are currently innocent. What are we going to do with these people that are actually carrying out these crimes? Have you got anything to say about that?
How long you got? So in 2021, Priti Patel stated in her strategy for tackling child sex abuse that the UK are world leaders in tackling child abuse, and that we place victims at the heart of approach. Well, I've been watching this space carefully for a long time, and from what I see, hear and read, this just simply isn't the case. So, when you think back to the conversation we talked about earlier, Gareth Davis, the baby he raped, that baby will be, so Gareth Davis got 27 years. He'll probably be out sooner. Yes. The baby will be only 27 years old when when Gareth is released from prison. So, the consequences of that will have a huge and negative impact on the survivor's life. It's like a ticking time bomb. But the focus remains on Gareth Davis, because it's news. When he's coming out, it's news. When he's, what he's going through inside, it's news. But it needs to not be news. And we need to focus again on the child of the offence. So, I think it's a big problem, what's going on. I interviewed 3 sex offenders last year, actually.
Wow.
Yeah, as part of research for my next book. And one in America who's on parole. And 2 here in the UK. Now, what was really interesting, I'm not there to give them sympathy. What I feel we need to do as a society is to start, obviously, toughening up on sentences here in the UK, understanding the survivor over the perpetrator, hands down, but also understand more from the perpetrator. The trouble is, I spoke to the governor of the most prolific prison of sex offenders here in the UK last year, and they are doing great work within their means, right? There's only so much they can do with the funding that they get. And they have great knowledge of the perpetrators that come in. And some are so psychologically impaired that releasing them is probably never a good idea, and never will be a good idea. There's all sorts of different strains of sex offenders and why they have offended. So understanding more. I'm only scratching the surface with some of the work that I'm doing. I'd like to know more, actually. So I'm sort of doing what I can to learn more about that side of things. I sit on an advisory board for sex offenders as well, so I can hear more of this conversation and understand more of this conversation. Although sometimes I think, I don't know if I'll ever really understand it, because the conversation is enormous. So we need to, I believe, as a society, the tackling child sex abuse strategies need to be seen, need to be heard, need to be given more thought on the survivor. Politicians have got their fingers in pies of everything, right? Priti Patel does what she can to make a change. But ultimately, Boris Johnson, unfortunately, in 2019 on LBC said investigating historic child sex abuse cases is spaffing money up the wall.
Saw it.
Yeah, and you've got Crispin Blunt supporting supporting Khan MP on his child sex offences. This all shuts survivors up. It puts survivors back in their box. It puts the lid back on it, because no one knows what to say or what to do. So we need to change that. Again, it starts at the top. We need to I believe we need to toughen the sentences. I believe we really need to look at, what happens to release of a sex offender here in the UK, and understanding what communities can do, because no one knows if there's a sex offender in their community, and I think that would be pretty good knowledge to have.
Yes.
So that would then help the conversation. This is, I mean, it's a minefield, this conversation, and I think we could probably chat for the rest of today on it, because this is ultimately, you know, yes, we can educate the children, yes, we can educate the survivors, and help the government, you know, hopefully get the government to understand the difficulties to support people. But this conversation, the top conversation, really should be matching about what can we do to reduce the crime. The work that you're doing, Jeremy, the work that I'm doing is vital to prevent child sex abuse, but it is also helpful for prevention of potential perpetrators in safeguard in young people, because they might hear something that you say or I say with the work that I'm doing. And I think, you know, as a guy, Jeremy, I think, you know, you're leading the way on this conversation, and I think what you're doing with the work that I see is vital, but I also think what you're doing could be, and actually just thinking sort of out loud here, with the work that you're doing on the visuals and things like that, could potentially trigger someone who may have had a urge to offend. They might think again. And I think that's where someone like you could really add some vital resources to this conversation for young people.
Yeah, that's incredible. I really appreciate those comments. And one of my big focuses are trying to get this conversation in front of people that may be tempted or feel an urge of some sort to offend in whichever way it is to a minor.
Absolutely. And not enough. I mean, I touch on it, but, you know, I'm doing a billion other things around this conversation, and, you know, no one is doing enough of that. And I think, you know, certainly with the work I'm doing, it's inclusive. But I feel as a leader in this conversation, Jeremy, and and I hate to say you are a guy,
yes.
The statistics, even though we know that men are abused, you know, is a problem.
Yes.
So it could be a really interesting part of your project to push forward.
Yeah, but it's very difficult, because if I say anything about working with potential perpetrators, you know, it brings anger instantly from people, because people see that as being compassionate or having sympathy, and I will keep working on how to communicate it in a better way. So
do you know what? Absolutely. And you know, the sad thing about this conversation is people like you and I will get trolled for the work that we do.
Yes.
Sometimes people say stuff and I'm like, oh, just, you know, I'm just going to have to block you now, because, you know, you have no, when you truly understand the compassion, the passion, the drive and determination behind a voice like you, Jeremy, you've got to educate the ignorant on this conversation. And I don't mean that in an unkind way, but anyone who thinks that what you're doing is showing support for the other side has to have their head tested, because you're clearly not. And you know, I champion you for that conversation, because my team always my team work closely with me, you know, I'm going where angels dare fly, right? And so are you. And that's how change happens. Big pants stays on these conversations are vital.
Yeah, thank you so much. Can you what do you find the most like challenging thing of your work? Like you just mentioned the trolls and possibly the negative comments you get. And I saw one of your posts recently about somebody commenting about the physical, one of your pictures showing your physical. I mean, it's so crazy. Are we not? I mean, how do you deal with all of that?
And I think like I said, I'm 50 this year. I've been talking in this space for 5 years, which isn't very long, because I only came out publicly when I was 45. But I'd gone into therapy when I was 12, 13. I was put into psychiatric care as a juvenile delinquent and a failure and a girl going nowhere. And of course, I lived that. That was my label for years, until I went into my own therapy at 23, and I've done my own development through business. I've become a very successful person through it, and I don't mean monetary, I mean mentally. To be able to get to 45, to be able to share and do all the things that I've done since then. If anyone wants to troll me, I think that it brings about another conversation, right?
Yes.
And someone always said, EJ, it's the day people stop talking about you that you're going to have a problem. And I'm like, yeah, do you know what? That's true. And good, bad, or indifferent, as long as the conversation stays out there, that is all that matters to me. What does concern me is that I write in depth about child sex abuse, my story, my life, and someone sees my breasts.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that is the problem of the world that we're living in. Someone said, you'd be great if your breasts were bigger. And I'm like, I just stunned. And so, you know, as my profile has risen over the years and it's become more public and out there through the work that I've done in this space and in the media and everything else, unfortunately, it's attracted people to think that that's okay. Yesterday, I got a message, do you like sex? Does it matter? I mean, I'm not even going to entertain a response. That's just going in the bin and you're going to be blocked. And yes. I hope that you're okay.
Yeah.
But, you know, you really need to understand these conversations aren't acceptable. And that's where the education and work that you're doing is really vital, because you know, this approach to women, and I'm sure you get it as well as a guy in a different way, this approach to women. In fact, someone said yesterday to me, oh, I should find it. Someone said yesterday, oh, because you're an attractive girl and you're nice, that's why people do it. And I'm like, what? And that's acceptable, that I'm nice. So I've got to, how about being nice and expecting respectful messages for the work that I'm doing? And someone then countered that by saying, look, she talks about child sex abuse. This is serious, right? You know, so I think, you know, I have for the trolls, I have far more people championing me than trolls, and I balance that out. And actually, as long as the conversation stays out there, it doesn't matter to me, because I can move on. I think, you know, you get to a point, maybe 10 years ago, I'd have been like, oh my God, someone's trolled me. Now I'm like, I don't care, as long as it keeps the conversation out there. I can block you, I can remove you. I'm not going to have any sleepless nights over it. And I have to understand that, sadly, that's part and parcel of developing a bigger profile. But again, this is what we need to stop. You know, I wouldn't, you wouldn't, I'm sure most people I know wouldn't dream of writing to someone to say, you would be great if your breasts were bigger, or do you like sex? And, you know, I mean, I could go on. I mean, the messages I receive are just shocking.
Yeah.
Yeah, 10 years ago, it would probably been fallen. It would probably cause me to fall flat on my face, but now it just makes me stronger.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And whenever I receive a comment that is hurtful, for sure, or negative about the work, I realize that you just need to just let that pass by and keep on moving forward. And actually, all it's really doing, as you mentioned, is highlighting the areas that need more work on, you know, people's attitude.
And I think sanity check as well, right? Sanity check, and remember what you're doing against some, you know, this is potentially a teenager at home. His mother's just gone out and he's a bit bored on his keyboard, right? So, you know, remember, or something, it could be someone potentially more sinister, but nothing you do or say, I don't respond, actually. I don't respond to any trolls. I don't respond, because that's just giving oxygen to something you don't need to.
Yes.
Is understand that there is nothing you can do or say. And actually, if someone's in that state of mind, then they probably should be listening to you or I about these conversations, and they're the ones that won't.
Yeah, absolutely, Emma. Okay, we've nearly done an hour, which,
wow,
these things go so quickly. Could you just let anybody that's watching or listening, let them know where they can find you, please?
Yeah, if you go to my website, emmajanetaylor.com, you'll find all my work links and contact forms there. I'm always happy to chat, signpost on, and listen to anyone really on this conversation. But yeah, that's probably the best place, emmajanetaylor.com.
Yeah, fantastic. And we'll put all the links in the description. Emma, thank you so much for agreeing to this conversation. The work that you're doing within the Parliament and young people, and how you've run this whole thing is really inspiring to me, and definitely encouraging. So thank you so much. And I'm sure we'll keep in contact for sure.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. You know, I follow you anyway. So I'm really inspired by your work.
Yeah, brilliant, Emma. Thank you.